Firstly, there's a reminder that it's been suggested that every element in every story is an aspect of our self. And then there's a reminder of a little anecdote about those two men who were lost in a forest. And as they were wandering around aimlessly, they found an old hermit sitting under a tree. And they asked him, "Can you point us the way to the nearest town?" And the old sage said, "Well, I can tell you, but whether you understand or not is questioned." And then the old sage said, "Listen, do you hear the sound behind the sound of the wind, behind the sound of the birds and the animals? That is a cascade, a waterfall. And waterfalls become streams, and streams become rivers, and towns are built by rivers." And the first man said, "Oh, that means that we have to follow the stream." And the second man, after a little pondering, said, "Is that one of those Zen adages, going with the flow?" The old sage said, "Maybe it is, and maybe it isn't." And then there's a story of a farmer who seemed to be beset by ill fortune. His crops failed, his sheep were barren, and so on, and so on. He was in a state of despair, tossing and turning, night after night, bewailing his fate. So one day, after waking up after a sleepless night, in a state of hopelessness, he decided to turn his back on all his endeavors and set out on the road to he did not know where. But after some time, in the heat of the day, he had to sit down and rest under a large tree. As he was sitting there, suddenly he heard the sound of wailing, sobbing, crying, and he looked around to see where this was coming from. He looked up into the branches of the tree, and he asked, "Who is that?" And the voice came out, "It is me. I am an Ifrit. Tell me your troubles, and I'll tell you mine." So the farmer told his story about his failures, his endeavors. And then the Ifrit said, "Well, because of my past karma, I am one whose spirit has been locked into this tree. But you can save me. If you allow me to come home with you, I will become your faithful servant, fulfilling your every wish Oh, the farmer was overjoyed. Of course he would agree to this. But then, as the Ifrit nestled himself on the farmer's shoulder, he said, "But you have to remember that you have to keep me busy, because if you do not, I will have to consume you." So the Ifrit went home with the farmer, and the farmer, of course, had plenty of tasks for it to do, but they all seemed to be done in a flash, tilling the fields and repairing the house, and so on and so on and so on, until it came to the stage where the farmer had nothing more for him to do, and he started to toss and turn at night because he had to be thinking of things to give the Ifrit to keep him occupied. He couldn't sleep. He was getting desperate. And one morning when he woke up and his wife said to him, "Well, you got a sleepless night again last night, didn't you?" And the farmer said, "Yes, I don't know what I can do. I've run out of things that I can get this Ifrit to do, and I know that as soon as I'm unable to do so, he's going to consume me." So the wife leant over and whispered in her husband's ear, and the farmer got up and invited the Ifrit to come with him, and took him down by the river that ran by the farmhouse. And he said to the Ifrit, "I want you to turn that river around so it flows the other way." So immediately the Ifrit did. The water turned around. But the power of nature was so great that as soon as the Ifrit turned the river around, it turned it back and flowed in the way that it was supposed to flow. But the Ifrit, being given the task to fulfill, this was its task, and this is what it was destined to do. And the farmer had a blissful night's sleep and slept blissfully thereafter. What's the deep meaning of this story? And the elements, the meaning of the elements that it contains. For us. What do the aspects of this story represent for us? Considering that each of them is part of our psyche, our self.
It's like when our mind gets out of control.
Yes.
We don't have any peace when it is running around like that.
What is the significance? If this aphid represents our mind, and it's given what is an impossible task, turning the river around, the forces of nature, life being greater than any power that the mind has. What is the significance of this river and the mind's relationship with life and nature?
Well, the mind is kept busy, isn't it, with the river.
Yes.
So therefore, in our everyday life, if our mind is constantly busy, then really you would never be at peace.
No.
If the mind is busy like that, doing something. But then on the other hand, he goes back and never thinks about it again.
Right.
So Pat, how's that work?
How does it work? Remembering that we ourselves have found affirmations or mantras to keep the mind occupied. And whenever the mind runs away, we'll come back to our mantra. But isn't a mantra like the river? If we really look back at the time when we needed to use mantras or affirmations, isn't that mantra like the river? And yet it worked because it occupied the mind, and we did have that peaceful experience of being brought back to the moment, isn't it?
But really we don't need that now, do
We do not need that now. And does that bring us back to this question that's been asked again? What is it that's present? Where are we when stillness and movement meet?
At peace.
Yes. At peace. We no longer need the mantra to rein the mind in. And when the mind is reined in, and we no longer need the mantra of turning the river back the other way, what is it that's present in our life?
No, it's like the stillness of who we are.
Could it be harmony with life?
Yeah.
Harmony with nature? We're no longer fighting nature or even using that to reverse the river? And what's that got to do with going with the flow? This adage, like in the first story.
That is going with the flow.
It seems.
Being with whatever.
Is it? Is it going with the flow?
I don't think so.
I think he was saying that sometimes you need to go with the flow and sometimes you don't.
The flow never ceases. It's life. The flow is always.
But it's the flow of life. It's not like we're making the flow, as you know. It's the flow of life.
Yeah.
It's not Yeah, I don't know. Something like that.
So while we're alive, we are going to be moving, but that doesn't mean we can't be still inside.
That's right.
So it's like a combination.
Absolutely. We have the
It
constant.
all sounds so simple, doesn't it? Like there's two little lines I read every day. It says, control your mind and do no harm. And just how hard is that? Control your mind
Yes.
and do no harm.
I also got from it that be careful what you take